thank you for the invitation to be with you this morning. Well, you've been having a series of sermons on the nursery rhymes, old nursery rhymes that are so familiar to us, and thinking how the themes of these nursery rhymes apply to life. I'm a Little Teapot, Jack and Jill, Baa Black Sheep, Humpty Dumpty, and there are more. Well, today we're looking at Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. You know it well. And I'm actually going to get you to sing it. How about that? I'm not quite sure did I put the words on, David? I can't remember if I don't think I have got them on there, but you know them anyway, don't you? So how about if we have a go at singing Twinkle Twinkle? Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Very good. Were you singing at home? I hope you were. Well, it's one of the first nursery rhymes, isn't it, that we sing to babies, and one of the first nursery rhymes that little children learn. It has the same tune as Baa Black Sheep, we won't sing that, and the same tune as the alphabet song, you know, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So it's the same tune, a very familiar tune. It's a simple tune, and it is often used as an early piece of music that children learn on the piano or another instrument because it is easy. You may not know this, but Mozart, the great composer, actually took that tune and wrote 12 variations of Twinkle Twinkle. You can check it out on YouTube if you want to. Well, the history behind Twinkle Twinkle is that it is part of a poem in Rhymes for the Nursery, which were written for children by Jane Taylor and her sister Anne, and it was published in 1806. So it's been around for quite a number of years. It's actually the first verse of a longer poem. There are another 4 verses. Somebody's nodding, you already know that. So here are the other 4 verses. When the blazing sun is gone, when he nothing shines upon, then you show your little light, twinkle, twinkle all the night. Then the traveller in the dark thanks you for your tiny spark. How could he see where to go if you did not twinkle so? In the dark blue sky you keep, often through my curtains peep. For you never shut your eye till the sun is in the sky. As your bright and tiny spark lights the traveller in the dark, though I know not what you are, twinkle, twinkle, little star. Well, questions and wonder are expressed in the nursery rhyme, wondering what the star is, likening it to a diamond, something that is known, because from a distance that is what the star looks like. It does look like it twinkles. There's a mystery about the star that draws the child's attention, a mystery that creates wonder and awe and leads to a desire to ask questions and to know more. That same kind of awe is expressed by David in Psalm 8 when he contemplates the sky. When I look at the night sky and see the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you set in place, what are mere mortals that you should think about them, human beings that you should care for them? So it places us in that kind of very small perspective when you think about the whole vast universe. And even more amazing that God knows each person in that universe and cares about them. I wonder if you can recall being in an open space somewhere, away from city lights, looking at the night sky filled with the same sort of amazement. The sky filled with the brilliance of stars in the faraway distance. I recall an experience like that in Central Australia, and looking up in amazement at the night sky. Magnificent, spacious creation filled with these amazing stars so far away. I can remember as a child in 1957 going outside with Mum and Dad and my sister and everybody else in the street to look at the first Sputnik. Does anybody remember that? I think it was 1957. I didn't check that. And with Halley's Comet as well, going outside. And there are various other phenomena that we read about and we'll go outside to check in the night sky. You would have observed children and grandchildren with their amazing spurts of growth that they go through. And it happens intellectually too, as they grapple with questions and learning. And their constant questions are fed with that curiosity to know more and to learn. Why? But why, Grandma? But why? And on it goes. Why? And there's always something more that the child wants to know. We can ask the same question. Why are we considering this nursery rhyme? Why have you been considering all of the nursery rhymes that you have over the past few weeks? So as you've worked your way through the series of nursery rhymes, you've been reminded of God's wisdom for living life well. God's wisdom for living life well. Now, we can read about that wisdom in the Bible, but God communicates his wisdom too in many other ways. And one way has been through the simple nursery rhymes. There's been a focus on who we are, our identity. How do we live with pain and brokenness? The why and how of prayer and never giving up. Some of the themes that have been drawn out of these old nursery rhymes. And the theme that I'm drawing from Twinkle Twinkle today, which David asked me to, is lifelong learning. Lifelong learning. How we never stop learning, even if our days of formal school and education are over. What are the helpful insights that we gain from our life experiences, from observing nature, from reading the Bible, from our relationships with others, and from what happens around us? We are absorbing information all of the time. Then we have to process it, and wisdom comes when we can apply it to life. And our learning goes on for the whole of life. Lifelong learning about ourselves, about life, and about God. It is interesting that the Greek word in the New Testament for disciple means a learner or a follower. A learner or a follower. Discipleship is a lifelong learning process. Teaching and learning are at the very heart of our faith. It is about learning to live in a way that is consistent with Jesus' teaching. And God designed the church, the body of believers, the community of believers, to be a community of lifelong learners. In the United States, one of the streams of Churches of Christ, which has influenced our movement here in Australia in history, is called the Disciples of Christ, sometimes simply called disciples as a movement or denomination. The 12 disciples that were with Jesus, that he called to follow him, learned as they went around with Jesus. They weren't the only people who went around with Jesus, but he had this core of 12 whom he drew around him to impart his teaching. And they observed by watching him how he lived, how he prayed, how he relied on God, how he related to others in his healing and teaching ministry. And they learned by listening to his teaching. They learned by observing and by listening. We have that example where the disciples said to Jesus one day, they'd been observing how he prayed, and sometimes he would go off on his own and spend a long time with God in prayer. And his disciples said, Lord, teach us to pray. So they had seen what Jesus did, and they saw the impact of that in his life. Jesus' desire was not only that they heard his words, but that they put his teaching into practice in their living. And that is the secret of wisdom, being able to apply learning to life. So it doesn't just sit there as a body of knowledge that we have, but we know how to apply it in each situation. And Jesus used a story to illustrate this. And thank you for Alethea for the way that you illustrated it in the building blocks with Lego. The story about a wise man who built his house on a firm foundation so that when a storm came, it would not collapse. In contrast, foolishness was building a house on sand. And when the storms and the floods came, it could not withstand the storm. It collapsed. So by implication, Jesus is saying that what he teaches, if we receive it and apply it, will strengthen our capacity to cope with life. It will give us a good foundation. And by using a parable, Jesus is not saying this is what you should do. He's offering it as a story and an invitation to his listeners to make a choice about whether to accept his teaching, to accept his way of life, and faithfully follow it. You know, Jesus never forced anyone to follow him. It's an invitation. There's freedom in that choice. And the point is that hearing and doing are the foundation of wisdom. Whereas foolishness is described as hearing. You hear the same thing, you hear the same teaching, but you don't do it. You don't go out and practice it. And the parable of the wise and foolish builders comes at the end of what is known as the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapters 5 to 7. These 3 chapters form Matthew's compilation of the teachings of Jesus rather than a single teaching session. So this is how Matthew has organised his gospel, his story about the life of Jesus. And you'll find in Matthew's gospel there are 5 main bodies of teaching where he gathers Jesus' words and has it in these sections. So this is from the section on the Sermon on the Mount, right at the end. So Jesus has just taught them about anger, retaliation, love for enemies, prayer, fasting, about worry and anxiety, the golden rule, and more. And after all of this, Jesus says, so after those 3 chapters that are gathered together, hear these words of mine and put them into practice, and you will gain wisdom. It's worthwhile spending some of your own reading time on Matthew 5 to 7 and looking at that teaching of Jesus. But it's not only the teaching that is important. Matthew adds the comment that the crowds who heard Jesus teaching were amazed because he taught with inner authority. They were used to their professional scholars, their scribes, who relied on the authority of their tradition and the authority of the Torah, the body of oral teaching and Hebrew scriptures that contained the law. But Jesus' authority came from within, from his unique identity, and the most important thing is that he lived what he taught. And people could see that. And that's the test of integrity for a teacher. Can the learner see that the teacher lives the teaching? It's a big responsibility that's actually placed on anyone who is called to preach. Because people can say, well, are you living what you preach? And we know that as humans, there are our failures. So it's important in what happens in preparation for a sermon is that you actually sit with God, walk with God through the week in preparation, asking God for the message. How will this theme be brought to life? And then committing it to the Holy Spirit to do the Holy Spirit's work of touching people's lives. It's a big responsibility. Does the teacher live the teaching? One of the hardest lessons we learn in life is through pain and suffering. No one is exempt from it. And it's not something that we actually want. Philip Yancey, in one of his books, says, when suffering happens, it forces us to confront life in a different way than we normally do. When we experience suffering, whether it's the death of someone close to us, an accident, the breakdown of a relationship, illness or a trauma, or we take on the responsibility of care of someone, our character, our life skills, our coping capacity, our resilience and our patience are tested. But we also learn about compassion and we learn about limits. How will I care for myself as well as those around me? It's a big lesson to learn. This kind of learning from life experience is not gained solely from books. Although there are many resources that can help you if you are going through a crisis. There are books, there are people, there are talks you can listen to, there are podcasts, there are films and series. Learning comes to us in all sorts of ways. And there is a promise given to all who experience suffering, and it's in 1 Peter 5 verse 10. After you have suffered a little while, God will restore, support, and strengthen you, and he will place you on a firm foundation. Have you experienced that in your own life? It doesn't remove the suffering or minimise it. No one, Christian or otherwise, is assured that they will not experience suffering in their life. So it's not suffering being removed or minimised, but there is the reassurance that we can come through it and learn through it, hard though it might be. And you would know in your own life how God brings people into your life to walk with you when you are going through a crisis or a difficult time. It's the school of suffering. You might wonder why it's important to engage in lifelong learning. You might have had enough of school or college or university. Sometimes teachers feel like that. But there is always more to know, more to learn, more to experience of life and faith if we have our eyes open to receive, to look around and discern what is happening. In my own life, I began a 3-year course last year in spiritual direction, or its newer terminology, spiritual companioning. It has opened up an area of spirituality that I've been interested in for a long time. And it will enable me to help people who want to reflect on their life and go deeper in their relationship with God. So I have learned through this course, both through books and lectures and living it and practicing it, I've learned about the importance of listening, of contemplation, of actually sitting or walking and just being quiet with God, discerning and being aware of God's presence. And one of the things that we're required to do as one of our assignments or written pieces is to keep a journal and to write in it at least once a week about your discernment or awareness of the presence of God through that week. So it might be in a conversation with a friend, it might be something that happens, might be something that I see or read. And so I write about that and the aspect of God that I have actually discovered more about. So I can say that I'm committed to lifelong learning. Paul writes in Ephesians 3:18-19, and this is one of the purposes of lifelong learning. May you have the power to understand, as all God's people should, how wide, how long, how high, and how deep his love is. May you experience the love of Christ, though it is too great to understand fully. Then you will be made complete with all the fullness of life and power that comes from God. This takes us to the depth of who we are in God, our identity in God, how he shapes us, understanding that more will be revealed to us about life, because God, who began the good work in you, in each one of you, will continue his work until it is finally finished on the day when Christ Jesus returns. That's a wonderful promise, isn't it? That the good work that is in each one of you that God has begun, he's going to continue and bring it to completion one day. So we invest in people and situations and in life now, knowing that there is more to come. It's a prayer that your life will be characterised by God's love, expressed through you, a love that is shaped by knowledge and insight. And as you allow practical wisdom to grow in you, you will apply your learning to experience so that you are able to discern what is appropriate, sometimes what is appropriate to say and not to say, or to do or not to do. God's grace working in you will produce the fruit of the way of life that God intends for all of creation: justice, peace, goodness, life consistent with the gospel, the shalom that Joe talked about before. For those of you involved in education, whether as a teacher or a student, and for all who seek to continue to learn, Pakistani woman Malala Yousafzai is an inspiring model. You may remember her story that as a teenager, just 10 years ago, she was shot in her head on her way home from school by a Taliban gunman because of her protests against the closing of girls' schools. Now, her father was a principal of a girls' school, so he had brought her up to value education. She was so badly injured that she was flown from Pakistan to Birmingham in England, where she underwent her surgery and recovery. In 2014, she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, the youngest person ever to receive the award. And she was also named one of Time magazine's most influential people. And then in 2015, just 3 years after she had been shot, she and others opened a girls' school in Lebanon, teaching refugees from the Syrian civil war. She was invited to address a United Nations gathering, and this is what she said: "I want to work hard. I want to sacrifice my whole life for the education of girls. And to be true, I want to say that I don't want to be known as the girl who was shot by the Taliban. I want to be the girl who struggled for her rights, a right to live in peace, a right to go to school." Then she declared, "Let us pick up our books and pens. They are our most powerful weapons. One child, one teacher, one pen, and one book can change the world." That's the impact that learning can have. Changing us, changing the world. So today, let us be grateful for teachers, educators, authors, researchers, academics, people who come alongside us in life to inspire us and challenge us. Be grateful for all of our life experiences that have shaped us and helped us to gain wisdom. All of this is expressed in a beautiful, simple prayer. It's about 1,000 years old, and St. Richard of Chichester wrote this prayer. It's a commitment to lifelong learning and discipleship. Jesus, help us to know you more clearly, love you more dearly, and follow you more nearly each and every day. Know you, love you, follow you. That's the essence of lifelong learning and discipleship. Amen. Now you have your response cards, and we, as is the custom here, you have a few minutes to reflect on the service, the whole service, and what you've heard about lifelong learning. And as a prompt, there are a couple of questions there. What does it mean for you to be a lifelong learner? What helps you to be a learner and a disciple, a follower of Jesus? And the prayer is there for you to reflect on. So I encourage you now to have a few minutes of silence as the music plays and to just take what you've heard today. How is God speaking to you today about the learning that has happened in your life?